On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied. "My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 80 to 120 litres. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now." What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. After this, he went down to Capernaum with his mother and brothers and his disciples. There they stayed for a few days. This is the word of the Lord.
Well, thanks so much for the wonderful reading, Heather. And indeed, welcome to our series on Restore, when we are looking at themes from the famous Psalm 23. And these themes hopefully will help us really to move on from where we've come from a period of 15 months of facing a horrific pandemic and lockdown. And we want to explore these themes to see really what God might have for us as we move forward, and as we then will hopefully be able to live those out. So indeed, we pray now that God uses this theme to speak to us powerfully as we move forward. So today's theme is rejoice. And I have to say, right now, I feel really affirmed. And that is because today's reading comes from this little-known place called Cana, where a joyful family party took place and where wine played a significant role. And that really reminds me very strongly of my upbringing, my background. And that is, I'd like to suggest, forget about the beer festival in Munich. Because I'm from a wine region where the grapes are cared for all year round, where then everyone comes together to harvest the grapes, and then indeed joins in wonderful harvest wine celebrations. And lots of laughing takes place, dancing, everyone dances with one another, and of course drinking of wine. As old wine, new wine, you have it all. And this goes on over weekends and moves from village to village. And it's just a wonderful experience that I was blessed with having in all my youth. So here we have a bottle from my particular area, and you have no idea what you're missing every day. But of course, I doubt that last year was such a joyful event. And maybe for the first time, this wonderful village harvest wine festivals was actually cancelled because of COVID. So you might rightly think, why? Considering all the pain and the losses we've gone through over the last 15 months, why are we talking about rejoice? And indeed, I could carry on, because in my very own family, that is my wife Kate, my 2 youngest daughters, and we experienced something quite traumatizing. Very recently, we've only come out of self-isolation last weekend, because first our daughter caught COVID at school, she brought it home into our house, and then my wife Kate got it from her. And unfortunately, both of them were not really well for quite some time. And we had to cancel our much longed for vacation in Wales. So we were really in a very anxious state. We were terribly disappointed. But then, in the midst of it, we were so grateful to see first how Ella was healed, and then how Kate was healed. And we then also decided to reinvest some of the money from the cottage we never stayed in, and in the evenings we feasted on wonderful takeaways from countries such as India, Korea, Vietnam, and Turkey. And there were moments in the midst of this anxiety, there were moments where we played wonderful games with each other, and we actually also taught our new little dog, Bobby, the puppy, how to play hide and seek, and he's very good at it. So whilst we faced a really frightening and unpleasant situation, there was also wonderful rejoicing. And we praise God for his overall protection, healing, and indeed unexpected joys. And this was quite important for sustaining us. And indeed, when we look at Psalm 23 and we see the sheep going through these life-threatening terrain, it makes us wonder really how we've managed to get through all this over 15 long months, and how God, the Good Shepherd, managed really to sustain us. And when we then see this very dramatic shift in the psalm, with this wonderful banquet taking place, it reminds me personally of our recent rejoicing, even in the midst of a COVID house. And the Psalms makes it quite clear. There's still danger around, but right here, there is this moment of bliss where everyone can relax and rejoice. And that is because God takes on the role of a servant and prepares this meal and a table where everyone can sit and enjoy themselves, enjoy wonderful food, and be blessed by God's overflowing presence. Now, all this, of course, reminds us that the table and the meal are really all about family. It's all about fellowship, and it's all about community. And it reminds us again and again how much we missed all this, being together with the ones we love during the pandemic. And yet, we've also managed, in many respects, to connect so well, and in new ways, with those who lived immediately around us, our neighbors. And of course, our deep longing, really, to be again together with the ones we love regularly, as we wish, our deep longing to go back into football stadiums or indeed visit open-air festivals, explains then the incredible public celebrations that erupted. For instance, a month ago in Spain, when at the stroke of midnight on a Saturday, a 6-month lockdown ended, and people in Madrid dancing and singing on the streets, and people in Barcelona were all flocking to the beach. And the feast in Psalm 23 reminds us really what a big issue food is during lockdown and continues to be. How many of us, remember that, how many of us panicked at the beginning of lockdown that we might not have enough food to eat. And then later on, we were kind of missing certain foods we couldn't get because restaurants were closed. And then, of course, as the pandemic led to increasing disparities, increasing poverty, inequalities, we've been inspired by those who've been volunteering to give out food in food banks or delivering meal deliveries. And I hope all of us have really cheered on Marcus Rashford's campaign for school meals for every child. So, as we are reminded about the centrality of food, we need it to survive. Food brings us together with each other in wonderful ways, gives us so much joy. And of course, God uses food to nourish us and to care for the poor. Maybe we want to discern what God is putting onto our heart about this. How can we use food to build community and bless others? Now the time seems perfect. We've got gorgeous weather at the moment. The parks looks wonderful. And of course now we have the start of Euro 2020. That will be followed by Wimbledon, and then we have the Tokyo Olympics. What about watching some of the events together? What about sharing these events over a barbecue? And maybe there's a chance to get to know people we kind of know vaguely, but we never really managed to get to know better. Well, straight after this service, we are having a Family of Nations bring and share party in our garden in, 1 hour. So we were kind of desperate. For a year or so, we were only able to see each other over Zoom. Then we were hit, as I explained, by this kind of self-isolation due to COVID in the family. And Kate and I, we've been desperate really to catch up with our friends who've come really to Leicester from around the globe, but have been very isolated, have been often struggling academically, financially, mentally, and in so many other ways. And it's so exciting then to come together as a group and talk and laugh, comfort one another, and eat all this wonderful food. And there will be amazing surprises. I'm actually not quite sure whether I'm able to eat all of it. Some of this is very hot, in particular from southern India. And we've asked our friends to bring along people who are on their heart and who might really benefit from rejoicing together. Well, talking about food and rejoicing together, here in today's reading from John, we have a very special and sumptuous wedding feast. A setting that is probably the most special event for partying and rejoicing, where people really put on their best clothes, they dance, they sing, they drink and eat the most expensive stuff, they laugh and they have fun. And would you believe it, right here, 10 months ago, in the midst of lockdown, there was still quite a bit of rejoicing going on because we celebrated here the wedding of our daughter. Okay, wearing masks, being socially distant and only being able to invite 30 guests was not ideal, but there was still a lot of rejoicing going on. God blessed them and blessed everyone else. And of course, this, out of all places, is a place to rejoice. a place for fellowship, a place for worship, and a place for sharing love. And I encourage really everyone who can to come in and taste this again personally as we come out of lockdown. Incidentally, my daughter and her husband, who are living in Cambridge, are here with us today, and they've come here to rejoice with us. They're sitting just over there. So, why don't you give them this kind of applause they never got 10 months ago and rejoice with them? Come on. This is a place to rejoice. Thank you so much. But getting back to this wedding feast in Cana, maybe surprising to some, is that Jesus and his mates were actually in the midst of it. And indeed, there's no mentioning really of non-alcoholic beer. No. What Jesus did was, he transformed 120 gallons of basically bath water into the very best wine. Surely this was an incredible party with Jesus as the master of the wine. But even more surprising, I think, were two other things. That Jesus, as I mentioned earlier, that Jesus uses this very little known place called Cana, and he uses a family occasion as the backdrop to the start of his ministry. And then this strange choice of Jesus for his first miracle. Now let's think about it. If you were in Jesus' shoes and you had to kind of pick a moment and a specific thing you do to make a strong statement about yourself, who you are and what you can do, wouldn't you rather heal a kind of paralyzed man? Wouldn't you rather do a really cool thing, walking on the water? Or wouldn't you rather do this kind of eye-dropping, healing, resurrecting of a dead person? All arguably much more impressive miracles. Well, I would do all these other things, but here's the truth. The truth is that all this is rather kids' stuff for Jesus compared to what he actually did in Cana. Because here in Cana, he announced something much, much bigger. Something that fulfilled the world-changing prophecy about the arrival of the Messiah stated in Isaiah 25. And there it says, "On this morning, the Lord Almighty will prepare a feast of rich food for all peoples, a banquet of aged wine, the best of meats and finest of wines. On this mountain, he will destroy the shroud that enfolds all peoples, the sheet that covers all nations. He will swallow up all nations. The sovereign Lord will wipe away the tears from all faces. He will remove his people's disgrace from all the world. The Lord has spoken." So Jesus actually made the biggest announcement possible. The Messiah has arrived. It's me, he says. And the messianic banquet has begun. But here's the thing, very relevant to this theme of rejoicing. Jesus comes as the Lord of the feast. He says, "I come with joy, rejoice." Now, of course, to some extent, Jesus is looking ahead, making us promises and giving us hope in the midst of the broken world we live in. And he's telling and showing us what we are heading for eventually, And that is the joy of all of us celebrating together in this heavenly banquet one day. So Revelations chapter 19 and 21, they describe heaven exactly like that, as a wedding feast. But equally important is that what Jesus is saying to all of us right now, something very important for us to understand and to respond to. Right here, where we are, he is offering something totally new and in abundance. He's choosing to perform his first miracle, this turning water into wine, whilst attending this family occasion in insignificant Cana, because he's saying a few things to us. He's saying, it's on my heart to be at work in your families, in your communities, in your circles of friends, when you come together, when you show love for one another. I want to then display my glory to you today, right here. And he's saying that I'm seeking immediacy with you, wherever you live, however insignificant the issue is that's in front of you. So please, he's saying, be open to the unexpected, that I want to transform things into wine of love, wine of healing, wine of hope, wine of comfort. So I wonder what God is saying to us here in relation to this theme of rejoice. And I say this really with an awareness that followers of Christ do not always have a reputation of being the most joyful people around. We are not always known for throwing the greatest parties, having the greatest fun, or indeed reaching out most joyfully. Well, Jesus seems to be challenging all this, saying, look at me. If you think I'm boring, if you think I'm all about just pain and suffering, then think again and think real hard. Do you really understand who I am? I am the Lord of the feast. I can make the heavenly banquet break into our lives, into your lives, into all of our lives right now. I can enrich anything. I can transform dreariness into fullness of joy. And again, behind this extraordinary invitation is the experience of God coming into our life. This is not about believing into God in our head, but experiencing God in action through powerful transformation. This is what the Lord of the Feast is all about, transforming ordinary things into wine of love. And surely, this is what we all want to experience and taste again and again. This is what Kate and I experienced when we started inviting internationals into our house years ago. We knew very little about Christian hospitality, other than Jesus seemed to make it a kind of habit of inviting himself and into situations with excluded people, sharing meals with those who are normally on the margins. But then extraordinary, beautiful things happened when we gathered to share weekly meals, when we shared friendships, when we talked about Jesus and worshiped together. God made his presence felt in a very powerful way. And everyone felt it. Our friends kept saying, "What's this? We have not experienced this kind of peace or love or sense of family before." Yes, we've been loving, we've been sharing, but none of that can really explain how the lives were totally transformed, their lives, but also our lives. Well, the Lord of the Feast seems to be loving these kind of environments, when we pursue healthy relationships, build family and community, and share love. Because then Jesus turns up and does his thing, changing water into wine of love, wine of healing, wine of hope, and lots of wine of joy. So, I wonder what God is saying to us about these things as we are moving out of lockdown, as we are living at a time when more and more people experience being unwanted, experience being unloved and uncared for, a time of loneliness, of despair, of hopelessness, a time of discrimination, injustice, and increasing poverty. I wonder whether we all fancy an incredible adventure, stepping out and collaborating with the feast, with the Lord of the feast, to turn water into wine of love. And I also wonder whether we are all encouraged by the Lord of the feast, and even though life can be pretty hard at times, but take some responsibility for joy in our lives.